My parents kicked me out. At 17, you'll be back begging in a month. My mother smirked. My father slammed the door in my face. I got angry. I never looked back. But 9 years later, my phone was full of missed calls. They were begging me to pick up. So I wasn't planning on ever sharing this story online, but after seeing some similar posts here, I figured maybe writing this all out might be therapeutic or something. And maybe someone else who's going through shit with their family might get something out of it. I don't know. Anyway, here goes. I'm Brady, 26 now, but this story starts when I was 17, junior year of high school. I was never the perfect son my parents wanted. My dad worked at a manufacturing plant and my mom was a receptionist. They weren't rich, but we were comfortable enough in our smallish town. They had this whole life planned out for me. Get good grades, go to state university like my dad did, marry some nice girl from our neighborhood, have 2.5 kids, and basically live their version of the American dream. Only problem was, I hated school. Not because I was dumb or anything. I got decent grades when I tried, but I have ADHD. Wasn't diagnosed until after all this went down. And sitting still for hours listening to teachers drone on about subjects I didn't care about was literal torture. What I did love was working with my hands, building stuff, fixing things. When I was 15, I spent a whole summer helping our neighbor, Judah, renovate his garage. And it was the first time I felt like I was actually good at something. My parents hated it. Every time I talked about maybe going into construction or learning a trade, my mom would get this pinched look on her face like I'd just told her I wanted to become a professional dumpster diver. My dad would lecture me about living up to my potential and how people like us don't work with their hands. Looking back, I think they were just obsessed with appearances. They wanted to brag to their friends about their son, the college graduate, not their son, the blue-collar worker. Things had been tense for months. I was working part-time at a local store after school, saving up money because something in my gut told me I might need. My grades were slipping because, honestly, I just stopped caring. Every dinner turned into an argument about college applications or my future, or why I was throwing my life away. The breaking point came in April, about 6 weeks before graduation. I'd been accepted to state. My parents had basically filled out the application, but I'd also been looking into this trade program for construction. It was cheaper, shorter, and actually taught skills I was interested in. I'd gotten in, and they were offering me a partial scholarship based on this portfolio of projects I'd put together. I decided to tell my parents over dinner. Bad idea. As soon as I mentioned trade school, my dad threw his fork down so hard it bounced off the plate. My mom started crying. Actually crying, like I'd told her I had 6 months to live or something. What followed was the worst fight we'd ever had. My dad called me ungrateful, said I was spitting in the face of all their sacrifices. My mom kept saying she was disappointed and couldn't understand where they went wrong with me. When I tried to explain why I was excited about the program, my dad cut me off and said something I'll never forget. No son of mine is going to waste his life like that. If you're too stupid to see the opportunity you're throwing away, then maybe you're not the son we thought you were. I lost it. Told them I was sick of living my life to fulfill their dreams. That I was almost an adult and could make my own choices. That they never actually listened to what I wanted. We were all yelling at this point. It got ugly. Really ugly. I said some things I'm not proud of. They said worse. Finally, my dad told me if I wasn't going to follow their rules and their plan, I could get out of their house. I think he expected me to back down. I didn't. I went upstairs, grabbed the emergency bag I'd already packed, told you I had a feeling, and stuffed in as many clothes as I could fit. Grabbed my laptop, the cash I'd been saving, about $1,200, and my important documents that I'd already collected, birth certificate, social security card. Thank God for my paranoia. When I came downstairs with my bags, my parents looked shocked, like they couldn't believe I was actually leaving. My mom started in with, "You're making a huge mistake," and "You think you know everything at 17. My dad just stood by the door with his arms crossed. As I walked out, my mom called after me. "You'll be back begging in a month. You have no idea how hard the real world." She had this smirk on her face that just broke something. My dad didn't even look at me, just slammed the door as soon as I was out. I stood on our front lawn for a minute, just kinda numb. It was starting to rain, which felt appropriate. I remember thinking, well, this is some movie-level dramatic bullshit happening right now. Then I called my friend Corey, whose parents were actually decent humans. Those first few days were a blur. Corey's parents let me crash on their couch, but I knew it couldn't be permanent. I was still in school, trying to graduate while figuring out where I was going to live, how I was going to eat, and basically how to be an adult overnight. I couldn't focus on anything. Kept having these moments where I'd suddenly realize, holy shit, I'm homeless. I'd have panic attacks in the bathroom at school. But one thing kept me going. Pure, stubborn anger. No way in hell was I going to prove my parents right by crawling back. Corey's mom helped me apply for emergency aid since I was technically an unaccompanied minor. The guidance counselor at school, one of the few adults who'd ever actually listened to me, helped me figure out what I needed to do to legally emancipate myself. I got more hours at my job and picked up a second one, washing dishes at a local diner. The hardest part wasn't even the practical stuff. It was the emotional shit. Seeing other kids with their normal families, hearing classmates complain about dumb arguments with their parents who still loved them at the end of the day, realizing that what my parents had done wasn't normal, that most parents don't kick their kid out for wanting to go to trade school instead of college, that the way they'd always made their love feel conditional wasn't how it was supposed to be. About 3 weeks after I left, my mom texted me, not to apologize or ask if I was okay, just, "When you're ready to apologize and accept our help with our conditions, you can come home." I didn't respond. A week later, my dad called and left a voicemail saying pretty much the same thing. They were so sure I'd fail that they were just waiting for me to come crawling back so they could say, "I told you so." I graduated high school while living on Corey's couch. My parents came to the ceremony, keeping up appearances, I guess. They tried to talk to me afterward, but I just walked away. I had nothing to say to them. By June, I'd saved enough to get a shitty apartment with 2 other guys. It was a dump, but it was the first place that was mine. I enrolled in that trade program using my scholarship and working almost full-time to pay for it. It was exhausting, but every time I wanted to give up, I'd remember my mom's smirk and my dad's slammed door, and I'd find the energy to keep going. That first year on my own was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was lonely, scared, and constantly exhausted. There were nights I cried myself to sleep because I missed having a family, even my fucked up one. There were mornings I woke up and couldn't find the energy to get out of bed. But I did, every single time. And you know what? I never went back begging. Not after a month. Not ever. This is getting long, so I'll post part 2 tomorrow if people are interested. That's when things started to turn around for me, but it was still a long road ahead. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this to blow up. Thanks for all the supportive comments. Part 2 coming tomorrow. Update 1. So, thanks for all the comments on my last post. Honestly didn't expect so many people to relate to this. Anyway, picking up where I left off, the first few months on my own were low-key a nightmare. NGL. After crashing at Corey's place for those initial weeks, I managed to find this absolute dump of an apartment with 2 other guys. One was this dude Marcus, who worked nights so I barely saw him, and the other was Tyler, who I'm pretty sure was dealing something but minded his own business and paid rent on time, so whatever. The place had roaches that would literally wave at you when you turned on the kitchen light. The shower would randomly go ice-cold mid-rinse. Nothing like screaming while shampoo runs into your eyes. And the walls might as well have been made of paper. I knew way too much about our neighbor's relationship drama. But here's the thing. It was mine. Or at least 1/3 mine. No one could kick me out as long as I paid rent. I was working these 2 garbage jobs, hardware store evenings, and diner on weekends. Between that and trying to finish trade school, I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. My diet was basically ramen, eggs, and whatever leftover pancakes or fries I could snag from the diner. Lost like 20 pounds those first few months. Probably looked like a walking corpse most days. The weirdest part was seeing these Instagram posts from kids my age living their best lives. College parties, family vacations, all that normal stuff, while I was trying to figure out if I could skip doing laundry for another week because the laundromat took quarters and I needed those quarters for the bus. My parents tried reaching out a few times, always with the same energy. When was I going to stop this nonsense and come home? Accept their help? Follow their plan? They never once asked if I was okay. Like, hey, your teenage son is living in a roach motel, maybe check if he has food? Nope. Just when was I going to admit I was wrong and crawl back? I remember my dad actually showed up at the hardware store once about 3 months after I left. I was restocking light bulbs when my coworker was like, "Some dude in khakis is asking for you up front." I peeked out and saw him standing there looking so out of place among the paint cans and lumber. I hid in the stockroom until he left, watched him through the window, standing in the parking lot for 15 minutes before finally getting in his car. He never came back. Things started to shift about 4 months in. There was this regular customer at the hardware store, Santiago, who was always buying stuff for different projects. One day, he needed help finding some specific sink parts, and I ended up not just finding them, but explaining exactly how to install them. Even drew him a little diagram. Turned out the guy did renovations and repairs, mostly kitchens and bathrooms. He said I clearly knew my stuff and asked if I'd ever thought about helping him out on some jobs. The money was better than the hardware store, and it was actually related to what I was learning in trade school. Felt like the first actual break I'd gotten since leaving home. Santiago was nothing like my dad. He didn't look down on people who worked with their hands. He took pride in it. Would literally stop in the middle of installing a faucet to show me the right way to set the gasket, or why one technique was better than another. For the first time, I felt like someone actually saw potential in me, not just what they wanted me to be. Around the 6-month mark, my parents changed tactics. My mom started texting that she missed me. My dad sent this message saying they were willing to compromise on my education if I moved back home. TBH, it just made me angry all over again. Like, were they seriously expecting me to give up my independence just because they were now allowing me to make some of my own choices? Hard pass. I finished my first year of trade school with decent grades. Turned out I wasn't too stupid after all. I just needed to be learning something I actually gave a crap about. Santiago started giving me more responsibility, better pay. I moved out of the Roach Motel into a slightly better apartment with just one roommate, this nursing student named Aiden, who was nearly as broke as me but at least understood basic hygiene. By 19, I'd gotten my first certification and was making okay money. Not Instagram flexing money, but enough to buy actual groceries, pay bills on time, even start putting a little aside. Santiago would recommend me for side jobs on weekends, small repairs, installations, that kind of thing, building a reputation, building a client list. The strange thing about working in people's homes is you see a lot about how families actually function. I'd be installing a light fixture, overhear parents encouraging their kids, praising them for B's on tests, hugging them just because. I'd see photos on walls of family vacations, graduation ceremonies, silly moments, normal families that fought sometimes but still loved each other without conditions. It was eye-opening, made me realize how messed up my own family dynamic had been. When I was almost 20, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. No idea how she found my address, probably through some mutual Facebook friend. I almost didn't recognize her standing there in my doorway. She looked older somehow. I let her in because what else could I do? It was awkward AF. She looked around my place with this expression, not quite disgust, but definitely like she was mentally cataloging all the ways my life was inferior to what she'd planned. Asked me these surface-level questions about what I was doing, how I was living, then got to the real reason for her visit. My dad had been passed over for a promotion, and they were struggling a bit financially. Wanted to know if I could help out. The audacity actually made me laugh. 2 years earlier, they'd thrown me out, told me I'd fail on my own, and now they wanted me to help them. I told her I was still establishing myself and couldn't spare anything. She left looking annoyed, like I'd failed some test. Didn't even say she was proud of me for making it on my own. After that visit, I went through a weird emotional patch. Started questioning everything. Was I wrong to keep them at a distance? Was I being too harsh? But then I'd remember how they'd treated me, how they'd never actually apologized, and I'd get angry all over again. My roommate Aiden noticed I was in a funk and introduced me to his friend Lucy, who was studying psychology. She became one of my closest friends and kind of helped me understand what I'd been through was a form of emotional abuse. That the way my parents had always made their love conditional on me following their exact plan wasn't normal or healthy. Talking to her helped me work through some of my anger and start healing. By 21, I was doing well enough to move into my own place. Just a small, one-bedroom, nothing fancy, but all mine. No roommates, no parents, just me. The day I moved in, I sat on my second-hand IKEA couch and literally cried. Never thought I'd get this far when I was standing on that lawn with my bags at 17. Around this time, Santiago offered me more stable work with actual benefits. Health insurance for the first time since I left home. He was getting more business and needed reliable help. It was a huge vote of confidence, and honestly, meant more to me than any approval from my parents ever had. Meanwhile, my parents kept trying to reconnect, but always on their terms. They'd invite me to holiday dinners, but make pointed comments about my choices. They'd offer help, which I never accepted, but with strings attached. Every interaction left me feeling drained and angry. Eventually, I started limiting contact to occasional texts and maybe one visit a year. What they never seemed to understand was that I was actually building a decent life. It didn't look anything like what they'd planned for me, but it was good. I had work I enjoyed that paid the bills. I had friends who accepted me for who I was. I was building something real, something that was mine. By 23, I had completed additional certifications and was Santiago's go-to guy for certain types of projects. We worked well together, and he started talking about bigger opportunities down the road. That was also when I met Lydia. She needed some repairs done in her apartment, and Santiago sent me. Smart, funny, didn't take any of my BS. We started dating, and for the first time, I let someone really know me. All the baggage, all the history with my family. Instead of running for the hills, she got it. Her own parents weren't perfect, though nowhere near as controlling as mine. Of course, when my parents heard I was seriously dating someone, they suddenly got very interested in my life again. Started following me on Instagram after years of ignoring my existence. Wanted to meet her. Wanted to play happy families. I kept them at arm's length. Lydia deserved better than to be dragged into their mind games. 4 years after being kicked out, I was in a stable situation, had my own place, was in a healthy relationship, and had built a life entirely on my own terms. My parents' prediction that I'd come crawling back within a month couldn't have been more wrong. But the story doesn't end there, because just when I thought I'd finally moved beyond their shadow, things were about to get complicated in ways I never saw coming. I'll post part 3 tomorrow. Things start to shift for both me and my parents in some unexpected ways. Update 2. Hey everyone! Thanks for sticking with my story. The support means more than y'all know. So, continuing where I left off, by the time I was 24, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. I'd been bouncing from job to job, gradually building up experience and putting money aside whenever I could. Nothing glamorous, mostly grunt work, but it paid the bills and kept me moving forward. My apartment was this tiny studio with a kitchenette that barely fit a mini fridge and microwave, but it was mine. No roommates, no parents, just me and my secondhand furniture. So I was scrolling through Facebook one night. Yeah, I know, boomer app, LOL, when this notification popped up. My cousin Madison had tagged me in a photo from some family gathering I obviously wasn't at. Didn't think much of it until I noticed my parents in the background. Mom was wearing this fake smile I knew all too well, and Dad was mid-sentence, probably telling one of his same 5 stories. But the weird thing? On the table next to them was this framed photo of me from my high school graduation. Like what? These people kicked me out, barely reached out except when they wanted something, and now they're displaying my photo like we're some happy family. I called Madison right away and she was like, "Oh yeah, they talk about you all the time, always telling everyone how proud they are of you." The audacity, I swear. It was like they were living in an alternate reality where they hadn't told me I'd be crawling back within a month. Anyway, around this time I met Lydia, not in some romantic movie way. We were both in line at Target, it was taking forever, and we started bitching about self-checkout. She had this way of talking where she didn't filter anything, just raw thoughts straight from brain to mouth. We exchanged Instagram, started texting, and things just clicked. On our 3rd date, we ended up talking about families, and I opened up about my situation. Expected the usual awkward, "that's rough" response, but instead, she told me about how her stepdad had been similar. Not as extreme, but the same controlling vibe. She got it in a way most people didn't. That night, we stayed up till like 3 a.m. just talking. And for the first time, I didn't feel like my family drama was this dark secret I had to hide. A few months into dating Lydia, my water heater decided to die a dramatic death. Came home to find water seeping under my bathroom door, had to shut off the main valve, and spent 3 days taking ice-cold showers at the gym while waiting for my landlord to fix it. Lydia suggested I stay at her place, but IDK, it felt too soon. That whole independent streak I'd developed was hard to shake. Around this time, my old high school friend Corey got engaged, and I was invited to the wedding. Hadn't seen most of these people in years, and TBH, I was nervous about what they'd think. Would they see me as the guy who failed, who didn't go to college, who disappeared? But when I showed up with Lydia, everyone was just normal. Asked what I was up to, seemed genuinely interested when I explained my jobs. No judgment, no comparisons to some imaginary life I should have had. Then came the awkward moment. Corey's mom, who'd let me crash on their couch right after I got kicked out, pulled me aside and told me my parents had been asking about me. Apparently, they'd run into her at the grocery store and spent 20 minutes fishing for information. Where was I living? What was I doing? Was I doing okay financially? That last one set off alarm bells. Sure enough, a week later, my mom texted out of nowhere, "Brady, your father and I are having a small gathering for Memorial Day. Would be lovely if you could come. Bring your friend, if you'd like." Friend, not girlfriend. Like she couldn't acknowledge Lydia was important to me. And the timing was suspicious, right after they'd been asking about my finances. I showed Lydia the text, and she just raised an eyebrow and said, "So they want something." I decided to go. Partly curiosity, partly still seeking some closure I hadn't found. Lydia came with me for moral support, even though she was like, "This has disaster written all over it, LOL." Walking into that house was surreal AF. Everything looked exactly the same. Same furniture, same photos on the walls, now including that graduation pic. Same smell of my mom's weird apple cinnamon air freshener that always gave me a headache. But I felt like a visitor, not someone coming home. The small gathering was basically just my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my dad's work friend Judah and his wife. Everyone acted super normal, like I was just a son who'd been away at school or something. The entire time I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally came after dinner. My dad pulled me into his study, that sacred space I'd never been allowed to enter as a kid without permission. He started with small talk about the economy, how things were tough all over, and then finally got to the point. He'd been downsized at work. After 27 years at the same company, they'd replaced him with some kid with a fancy degree who'll work for half the salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those years pushing me toward college and now he was bitter about college grads. He didn't outright ask for money, but kept hinting at their temporary difficulty and how family should support each other in hard times. I just sat there thinking about the night they'd thrown me out. My mom's smirk, her certainty I'd be back begging within a month. I told him I'd think about it. That was all I could manage without saying something I'd regret. Lydia and I left soon after, and in the car, she just looked at me and said, "Well, that was the most passive-aggressive dinner I've ever survived." For the next few weeks, the texts from my mom became more frequent. How was I doing? Had I thought about what my dad mentioned? Did I need their old dining table since they were updating the house? Translation, selling furniture to pay bills. Meanwhile, my life was actually on an upswing. I'd found a decent paying job at this local place, nothing fancy but stable with actual benefits. Lydia and I were getting more serious, talking about maybe finding a bigger place together since my studio was basically a closet and her roommate was driving her nuts. Then came the Facebook post that changed everything. My mom wrote this long dramatic post about hard times and trusting God's plan during unemployment. That was obviously a fishing expedition for sympathy and help. The comments section was full of relatives and church friends offering prayers and support. But what got me was the last paragraph. "We're so blessed to have our son Brady supporting us through this trial. Family truly is everything." I nearly choked on my coffee. I hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't given them a dime. And here she was, publicly announcing that I was financially supporting them? The comments were all praising what a good son I was. I called her immediately, asked what the hell that post was about. She acted surprised by my anger, said she was just expressing gratitude for my emotional support, and that people assumed the rest. But I knew exactly what she was doing, creating public pressure so I'd feel obligated to help. That night, Lydia found me making a spreadsheet of my finances, trying to figure out if I could afford to help them without derailing my own life. She sat down next to me, took my hand, and asked, "What would you tell a friend in your situation?" And that hit me hard. If someone told me their parents had kicked them out at 17, barely contacted them for years, except when convenient, and were now expecting financial support, I'd tell them they didn't owe those people anything. So I made a decision. I texted my mom that I wouldn't be providing financial support, that what they were going through was tough, but I was still building my own life, still recovering from being thrown out as a teenager. I suggested some local resources for job seekers and financial assistance, the same ones I'd had to use years ago. Her response was a single okay, then silence for 3 weeks, until yesterday, when my phone exploded with notifications, texts, calls, voicemails, all from my parents and various relatives. Apparently, my parents' financial situation had gone from bad to worse. Dad still hadn't found work. They were facing possible foreclosure, and somehow, this had all become my problem to solve. My aunt left a voicemail saying I needed to step up and be the man your father raised you to be. The irony of that statement made me laugh out loud in a way that probably wasn't entirely healthy. Lydia and I stayed up late talking about boundaries and family and obligations, about the difference between forgiveness and forgetting, about what I could live with, both emotionally and financially. I still don't know exactly what I'm going to do. Part of me wants to help because despite everything, they're still my parents. Another part remembers standing on that lawn with my bags, my mom's absolute certainty that I'd fail without them. The roles have completely reversed now, in a way neither of us could have imagined 9 years. I'm going to meet with them tomorrow, alone, at a coffee shop, neutral territory. I've got some conditions in mind if I do decide to help, and boundaries that will not be crossed again. Life's weird, guys. 9 years ago, they thought I couldn't survive a month without them. Now they're the ones who can't manage without me. Not sure if that's karma or just the universe's twisted sense of humor. We'll update after the meeting tomorrow. Thanks for reading all this and for the support. Finally, update. So yesterday, I left off with a bit of a cliffhanger. The day before the big meeting with investors, I got a frantic call from my mom. At first, I ignored it. TBH, I was way too busy prepping my presentation and dealing with last-minute stuff. But then she called 4 more times in a row. Then my aunt called. Then my cousin. Something was clearly up. When I finally answered, my mom was crying so hard I could barely understand her. After she calmed down a bit, she told me my dad had been laid off again, but this time it was worse. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The car had just died, and now they'd gotten an eviction notice. They had 2 weeks to come up with the money or they'd lose the house. I sat there in my office, staring at the wall of awards and certifications I'd earned over the years, feeling nothing? No, that's not quite right. I felt annoyed. Annoyed that after everything, after 9 years, they were still pulling this same shit, still expecting me to drop everything and rescue them. And of course, the timing couldn't have been worse. Right before the most important meeting of my career, I told my mom I'd call her back, hung up, and just sat there for a while. Lydia came in and immediately knew something was wrong. After I explained, she didn't tell me what to do, just asked what I wanted to handle it. That's one of the million reasons I love her. So I made a decision. I'd deal with my parents after the investor meeting, one crisis at a time. I turned my phone off, focused on my preparations, and tried to put family drama out of my mind. The meeting went well, like surprisingly well. The investors were impressed with my portfolio and plans. They asked tough questions, but I'd prepared for them. By the end, they were talking about potentially backing not just this project, but future ones too. It was literally everything I'd worked for since that rainy night when I'd stood on my parents' lawn with nowhere to go. When I turned my phone back on afterward, I had 27 missed calls, not just from my parents, but from aunts, uncles, cousins, even people I barely knew. My voicemail was full. My Facebook Messenger was blowing up. Apparently, my mom had mobilized the entire extended family to pressure me into helping them. I drove home feeling a weird mix of emotions: pride about the meeting, anger about my family's tactics, and this creeping sense of obligation I couldn't quite shake. When I walked in, Lydia was on the couch with her laptop, and she had this look on her face, part concern, part, "You're not gonna believe this." Turns out, my mom had posted this long dramatic thing on Facebook about how they were losing their home and how certain people, gee, wonder who, had forgotten family comes first. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. Several relatives had commented with stuff like, "I'm sure Brady will help when he sees this," and "Family is everything. He'll come through." I just stood there reading these comments on Lydia's screen, feeling my blood pressure rising with each one. They were trying to publicly shame me into bailing them out. After everything they'd put me through, they still thought they had the right to manipulate me like this. I decided right then. Enough was enough. I was done with the vague boundary, the occasional help, the strained holiday visits. It was time to either fix this relationship for real or end it completely. I texted my parents saying I'd meet them tomorrow at their house. Just me, them, and 9 years of unresolved shit. That night I barely slept, kept thinking about what I would say, what they might say back. Lydia held me and reminded me that whatever happened, we had built a good life together. That no matter what went down with my parents, I had a family now. Her, our friends, the people who'd actually been there for me. I drove to their house the next morning feeling calmer than I expected. Their neighborhood hadn't changed much since I was a kid, but their house looked smaller, shabbier. The paint was peeling, the lawn needed mowing. The flower beds my mom used to obsess over were full of weeds. It was like seeing the physical manifestation of their decline. My dad answered the door. He'd aged so much in the past few years, thinner, grayer, shoulders permanently stooped like he was carrying something heavy. He didn't say anything, just nodded and stepped aside to let me in. The inside was worse. Cluttered, dusty, with that slight smell houses get when basic maintenance starts slipping. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she started with the whole, "Thank God you're here, we knew you'd help" routine, not even waiting to hear what I had to say. I cut her off and told them both to sit down. For once, I was going to talk and they were going to listen. I laid it all out. How they'd thrown me out over wanting a different future than they'd planned. How they'd predicted I'd come crawling back within a month. How for years they'd only contacted me when they needed something. How they'd never once genuinely apologized or acknowledged how wrong they'd been. My dad tried to interrupt with the usual excuses. They were doing what they thought was best. I was being disrespectful. They had given me everything growing up. I just held up my hand and kept going. Told them about those first few months after they kicked me out, sleeping on couches, working multiple jobs, crying myself to sleep from exhaustion and loneliness. How I'd had to figure out basic adult stuff on my own because they'd decided their conditional love was more important than their actual child. My mom started crying again, saying they'd made mistakes, but they were still my parents and family had to stick together. That's when I really lost it. Asked where this family sticks together attitude was when I was 17 and homeless. Pointed out that they only seemed to remember we were family when they needed my help, not when I needed theirs. The conversation went around in circles for a while. They'd apologize vaguely, then immediately follow it with justifications or turn it back on me. Classic narcissist playbook. Eventually, I got tired of it and laid out my terms. 1, I would help them avoid foreclosure this one time, but after that, they needed to downsize to something they could actually afford. 2, they had to take down that manipulative Facebook post and tell everyone that they were working through their financial issues privately. 3, if they wanted any relationship with me going forward, we'd all start therapy together. Not for reconciliation necessarily, but for establishing honest communication and proper boundaries. 4, they needed to understand that my life, my relationship, my choices were mine. Any future support, emotional, financial, whatever, would depend on them respecting that. I expected arguments, guilt trips, the usual tactics. Instead, my dad just looked defeated, like he finally realized he had no cards left to play. My mom was harder to read, kept looking between me and my dad like she was waiting for him to fix this somehow. Finally, they agreed to my terms. Not enthusiastically, but they agreed. I wrote them a check for the mortgage back payments on the spot. Not because I owed them, but because I wanted to close that chapter and move forward on my terms. As I was leaving, my dad followed me out to the porch. For a second, I thought he was going to try one more guilt trip. Instead, he said something that actually caught me off guard. "You turned out all right. Better than all right. Not how I pictured, but you did good." It wasn't a full apology, wasn't even close to making up for everything, but it was possibly the first genuine thing he'd said to me in years. I didn't respond right away, just stood there on the porch where he'd slammed the door in my face 9 years ago. Finally, I just said, "I know," and walked to my car. In the months since, it's been complicated. They've kept their end of the bargain so far. Therapy is awkward and difficult, but necessary. They're looking at condos and smaller houses. The Facebook drama got cleaned up. Small steps. I don't know if we'll ever have the kind of relationship other people have with their parents. Too much water under that bridge. But at least now we're building something based on reality, not manipulation and denial. What I do know is this: that scared 17-year-old kid standing in the rain with nowhere to go, he did all right for himself, built a life on his own terms, found people who love him unconditionally, and eventually, he stopped letting his parents' rejection define him. That night, lying in bed with Lydia, I finally deleted all those missed calls from my phone. They'd been living in my notification center for weeks, this digital reminder of my parents' desperation. As I watched them disappear, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a quiet sense of closure. 9 years ago, they thought I couldn't survive without them. Turns out, they were the ones who couldn't survive without me. And in the end, that realization was worth more than any "I told you so."